So today I'm joined by Jo McKinney, a growth and marketing leader who spent her career working at the intersection of technology and brands, human behavior. Jo has led teams through multiple moments of change in our industry, from early mobile to today's AI-driven shift. She's currently Chief Growth Officer at Board of Innovation and Chief Marketing and Growth Officer at Elemind Technologies, where she's deeply involved in shaping how organizations grow and adapt. Jo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to learn from someone like you who's seen the things you've seen. So, to begin, you made a very powerful and intentional choice to step away from your role as the CEO of an agency. You said you thought that experimenting after that would lead you to your next big thing, but instead, experimentation itself became the focus. And I feel like that's so interesting. So I'm curious to know, once you realized that, what changed in how you approach your work?
Wow, I think you actually said that better than I've described it to people, because it's an interesting thing to try to explain to people, particularly when you've been a CEO and have left that role. Everyone assumes that you're in transition to the next big role, and I think what I've learned over the last 2 years is sometimes a transition is actually where you need to be, and that it's okay to be in a portfolio stage of your career rather than in a more linear stage of your career. I think we all grow up in business being told that success is sort of climbing this linear ladder, not creating a playground for ourselves that's more horizontal, right? And of course, I have the luxury of saying I made it to the top of the ladder because I was a CEO. So I certainly have had that feeling of accomplishment in my career. But right now, what really is feeding me is the ability to do more than one thing at the same time and to actually be in a major learning and transformation mode, particularly because of the time that we're in. And of course, you mentioned that I've lived through a lot of other change. People point this out to me that, when you've been around for a while, lived through mobile and the internet and a lot of the disruption that came to the marketing model from all those new technologies. And just like at those times, AI is a general purpose technology that's going to transform. Unlike those times, AI isn't just something that we are using to transform the way we market. It's also creating new audiences for marketing. So it's a really different time. And so having lived through a lot of change and transformation, having deep experience in what great human work looks like, I feel very much that my energies and talents right now should be focused on leading the charge in the areas that I know really well, because I feel like that is what we need to be doing right now. That anyone who is applying either generative or agentic AI to their work needs to do it through the lens of deep human judgment. And who has deeper human judgment than people who have deep experience in the work that they've done, or functional level experience, or whatever that might be. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's sort of how I think about a portfolio career right now, and the benefits of it, because the work that you're doing feeds the different aspects of your knowledge and lets you bring value, I think, in unique ways to the different types of work you're doing or the different types of people you're partnering with.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And I feel like it must have taken a lot of courage to take that step, because like you said, it was like the highest you could go being a CEO. So I really admire your decision and your courage. And I think it must have involved a great conviction and mental discipline to sort of remove yourself from, like I said, the top of the chain, to go and like you say, be in the front lines of this.
Yeah, I miss the work. I miss the practitioner. I will say, I remember my mother saying to me, "Wow, you're so brave." I said, "Well, or really stupid, one or the other." Only time will tell. But I think, honestly, at the time, I was really ready for a change. I knew I had the experience of leading, obviously, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience and grateful for all the people that I worked with. But I was itching to be a practitioner, and I was doing a lot of sidebar experimentation with generative AI as soon as it came out, and I knew that all the work of my career, and I had had a deep career in brand strategy and insights and innovation and marketing. I knew all that work potentially would be changing, and I didn't want to necessarily be in a CEO role on the agency side, which, by the way, the agency model was also being seriously disrupted. I wanted to be kind of on the front lines of practice. And so at the time, I think I knew that I had to go in order to grow. Like that, I always give advice to people in their career. How do you know when it's time to leave a job? It's when you feel like you're not growing anymore. And that's true at any stage of your career. It's true when you're 5 years into your career, if you're in a job where things aren't new or you're not picking up new skills. It's true 20 years into your career, and it's true even when you're a CEO. And I think if everyone kind of lived by that mantra a little bit and had more of a beginner's mindset, we'd have a lot of learners on the front lines. And that's kind of what we need right now. I think particularly right now, like this is not a time for experts. Like it's time for expert knowledge, but not experts at what we're doing. Like you have to be willing to kind of break things right now.
I love that. And I love that what you say of not being afraid to start over and
Yeah.
to make the decision of leaving somewhere where you're not growing anymore, where you have like reached your maximum. I can relate because I was also in a position like it
Yeah.
was my first job and I had spent like a little more over than a year. And it was a very hard choice. That's why I sort of,
Yeah.
I really see you in that decision that you made because it is very hard. But I think, yeah, definitely it's, you're doing it for you and for your future. And it's very inspiring.
It's a very common place for people to be
Yeah,
and to question. And I'm a very restless person as it is. Like I'm constantly questioning, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I spending my time the way I should be spending? And the answer isn't always yes, right? But when you come across that question over and over ago and you listen to your heart, you'll figure it out. You'll know when it's time. And I felt strongly that I was there.
absolutely. I feel like if you're getting these like internal questions,
Yeah.
you need to
Yeah.
listen to them. You need to listen
Yeah.
to them. It's just,
You have to listen to yourself.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
definitely listening to your inner voice. It's so important.
Yeah.
So you've been working in marketing and growth through, like you said, several big shifts, early mobile,
Yeah.
digital transformation, and now AI. So you've seen industries adapt to new technologies more than once. So looking at this moment compared to the changes you've seen before, what do you feel feels different this time?
Gosh, it's interesting. I was at the IAB last week, the Interactive Advertising Bureau's big conference, and these are all the people who have been on the front line of creating the infrastructure. First, when digital was born, and how do we create standards and ways of working? And this is exactly the moment we're in right now. There's so much going on, so much experimentation happening, but there needs to be more of a uniform path forward for publishers, for brands, for advertisers, for humans, all in this mix. So I think that's similar, in that when a new technology comes, it causes the need for a lot of new infrastructure, new process, new ways of working. What feels different this time, I guess, would be that as we talked a little bit about, there's not just a new technology, there's a new audience in marketing. So I would say over the last 2 years, mostly with generative AI, marketers have been experimenting with lots of tools, new tech stacks, new capabilities. But when you think about more autonomous workflows and agentic AI, marketers have to think about a new audience. We're going to be marketing to humans and marketing to agents. And human decision making is going to change because of agents being part of the decision process. And we're already starting to see the effects of that a bit. You can see with the rise of, the availability of agentic shopping. It's not a huge behavior right now, but a lot of shopping research and research in general is now happening in AI search, which is a really different opportunity and problem for marketers in many ways, because it means that our traditional funnel is being condensed and someone might become aware, consider, and convert well, without ever visiting a brand. It could happen in one place and in one platform, which for marketers, we're like, well, wait, how do we drive the behavior that we want at each stage of that? So I think it's causing a lot of rethink. And I think the interesting thing from my perspective is we have an opportunity to build out insight into this new audience in the way that we typically have with human audiences. How do agents make decisions? How are they the same or different from the way humans make decisions? How will human decision? What does that mean? And so there's a lot of really interesting shifts happening right now that feel different, I would say, than prior technology. That said, I will say there's a lot of things that are the same. I'm frustrated because I feel like a lot of people's early work in AI right now has been focused on efficiency, applying AI to their existing processes and or existing ways of working to drive efficiency, which to me is not an interesting conversation, number one. And number two, it can be a dangerous conversation because when you're focused solely on efficiency, it has consequences and it has human consequences. But if we turn our attention to a new stage of evolution in the way we think about applying AI to the work we do, and we focus it instead on what are the complexities that I could never solve for alone, and how could I apply AI to that? Then we think about applying AI in growth models and in ways that complement what humans are great at. And that to me gets much more interesting and where I'd love to see more companies transitioning their energies. And I feel like we're starting to see the turn in that a little bit, and I'm hoping to see more and more of that over the coming year.
That's very interesting. And what you're saying leads to my next question.
Oh, perfect.
How does introducing AI actually change the way growth decisions get made inside an organization? Like you've been like in the center of.
Yeah. Well, I think I guess, inside an organization, obviously, there's applications for using AI in decision making and in thinking about organizational structure slightly differently and defining agentic roles, an org chart that actually has agentic collaborators in combination with humans inside companies. And then outside companies, obviously, there's a lot of things happening that are changing the way marketing works and what succeeds. What I'm really noticing, it's interesting because I'm working both as a chief marketing officer. So I'm experiencing firsthand how the traditional growth levers just aren't working in the same ways that they used to work. And I'm standing up ideas and things that, honestly, in my entire career as a marketer, we've never done, and they're working and they're successful, which is really interesting. And at the same time, I'm working with some larger Fortune 500 companies who obviously are greatly resourced and have the ability to invest in really interesting capability building, and working through some of the challenges that they're facing both organizationally and in thinking about what's next from a marketing perspective. So those things are so interesting, like being on the front lines of seeing what's not working and trying my hand at hacking growth in that role, and then advising some larger companies. And, I would say in general, on the larger organization side, most of the complexity right now is on the human side of it. You can't just throw technology at people and expect it's going to be universally a positive experience. Where does human expertise come into contact with this? How do we teach judgment to people? How do we make clear roles and rethink processes and rethink outputs? And a lot of that hard work still needs to be done across a lot of companies.
Definitely. So in your work, like you're helping companies think about how AI will interact with brands, not just behind the scenes, but in how brands are understood and chosen. So as companies start to thinking about that future, what's one thing you think brands should stop doing because it won't work much longer? Like you've been there in that decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting right now is that we have to lean into trust signals more than sales signals, if that's a way to phrase that. I'm not sure that's really clear, but if we think about how decision making is moving forward, and we think about just overwhelming amount of content that's being generated by AI and making feeds even more cluttered than they ever were, we have to really think about how we are building trust versus building awareness. people. And I think that can take on a lot of different roles, and tactically, I'm already experimenting with that in my CMO role on Elemind, and having some really good success leaning into sending trust signals more than driving people to sales. It ultimately is converting, but in a different pattern. And I think this is something we're really all going to need to think about, as there's more and more skepticism out there, there's more and more clutter out there, there's a lot of fake stuff out there. What are we doing to build a trusted journey for someone who's interested in our category or our products or a brand, and a trusted relationship as a brand? And what is going to be the role of brand in the future? Early days, a year ago, when we were doing some consulting work on the future of marketing, we were looking at the 3 to 5 year future, and we were making a lot of potential guesses of what the rise of agentic AI might mean to commerce, to brands, to marketing in general. I remember being in a room with some folks and arguing about, do we think that agents, for instance, would make more rational decisions, right? These are not human, right? So you'd think their purchase decisions would be far more rational. They would seek out the best price product or the highest quality product or the best rated product. And certainly some of that is true. But there's been some recent research about feeding AI like stressful information and letting it shop, and that it shops indulgently the way humans do after being stressed. So then you're like, okay, maybe it's not really as rational as we thought it was. Maybe there's more to it. And I think we're in those very early stages of trying to understand that, but it's interesting,
That's
right?
fun. It's like, but what do you mean by stressful information?
Oh, I think the study, and I can send you a copy of it. I'll find it. But like stressful information about the world or whatever. So in the same way, if you were going grocery shopping and you were relaxed, you'd probably make healthy choices. But if you just heard some terrible news, or, were stressed out about politics or about the environment or about what's happening in the world or whatever it might be, you might be more inclined to buy indulgent foods and things like that. Yeah. And it basically was a test like that in terms of prompting the AI with information that would cause it to, I guess, feel that human condition in some way. So yeah, interesting, right?
Very interesting. And you were part of that experiment?
No, it's just a study that I read. I think, part of what's so interesting right now is things are moving really, really quickly. But there's a lot of academic research happening right now across a lot of areas around AI and the behaviors of agentic AI. And I mean, just this past week, I don't know if you've seen all the news around Moltbot and AI agents forming their own social network and community where humans are not allowed to join and things like that. So obviously there's a lot that we don't know and a lot of stuff that's coming up. Obviously that is as equally concerning as fascinating, because you're like, are we putting in the protections that we need to put in this new future? And the answer is probably not as much as we need to. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of unknowns right now. There's a lot of speculation. Yeah. There's a lot of good research going on, but we'll know when we know. I mean, these things are evolving very, very quickly. Okay. I mean, what wasn't true 6 months ago that is true now, there's a lot of that going on.
Wow. Yeah. So wait, let me get this straight with that. So agents have like a community, or?
Yeah, supposedly they have created a social network of their own that humans are allowed to observe but not allowed to participate in. And it included them setting up a religion and lots of very human type social structures. Yeah.
Wow, that's insane. And like you said, like things are moving so fast. And what was true 6 months ago, it can be completely different. So 6 months from now, where are we going to be?
We don't know. And I will say it was interesting. I did a talk in August on agentic commerce, and it was all around what's coming next. And then was speaking at a conference in December for Board of Innovation at their Autonomous Summit, which is awesome. And you should check it out because lots of great content there. And I was going to speak about agentic commerce. And I went to, take a look and see what I wanted to talk about, and realized, oh my goodness, like everything that was in my August presentation, that was sort of like, we think this is coming, we think this is coming. It actually was here in many ways. And I think we're in that time where things are moving at such a fast pace. And it means for any practitioner in any field that you're working in, it's very hard to wrap your mind around, how do I do my existing job? How do I think about how my existing job might be changing? How am I experimenting with things that seem to be in flux? What's going to work today versus work tomorrow? It's a really stressful time for people in many ways because you can't even keep up with it. Even if you tried, you could have the best AI trained news feed that you want, and you're still going to feel pretty much overwhelmed by the pace of change. And I will say for marketers, I don't think the job has gotten easier. I think it's gotten more complex. For all the last 2 years, people talking about AI making creativity and marketing easier, I don't think that's the case right now. I think most people feel like it's more complicated than it's been because while there might be new tech stacks that are interesting and maybe some shortcuts that are working really well, there's also a lot of new complexity to understand and a lot of training needed, a lot of reimagining of process. Like I think if all anyone is doing in their functional role is thinking about how do they insert AI into it, they're really missing the point in many ways. And so, but taking the time to stop the work that you're doing to say, how might I work differently with an agentic collaborator as well as my human collaborators? I mean, who has the time in their day-to-day to do that? So I think it's a really, really complicated and overwhelming time for people in marketing. I think that's true probably for people across a lot of functional areas.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very interesting to see how as humans react and adapt to this uncertainty, to this change. That's crazy. Crazy times we're living in.
It is kind of crazy.
So you've worked closely with early stage products and founders, helping turn new ideas into real brands. So at what point do you think founders or CMOs tend to make things more complicated than they need to be? And what usually needs simplifying instead, would you say?
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. How do people make things more complicated? Yeah. Well, I think it starts at the very beginning. When you're first defining your business model or your go-to-market strategy, I think getting to that sharp stick in the eye value proposition and brand positioning to me is a very, very important stage of the process. It's simple in that the idea, the framing has to be very, very clear. But I think people can get very seduced by execution versus strategy. Like people don't fall in love with strategy, they fall in love with execution. So they tend to get ahead of themselves and they're like, I have this idea. And that's fine. But if that idea is not the core intersection of a deep human insight, the truth about your product and the truth about the category that you're entering, it doesn't matter what the idea is. So I think people often get really ahead of themselves from that standpoint. And I think people tend to be very much focused on execution versus strategy in a lot of their decision making. And that's easy to understand because we're much more easily seduced by execution than strategy. I personally think strategy is sexy, but not everyone does.
I love that. Strategy is sexy.
It is. It is. And I'm sure there's a million other examples, but that's just one that comes to mind right off the bat.
Very, very interesting. I had never seen it that way, but absolutely. We jump to the idea, but you don't think of the process. That's very
well. Or thinking about how to judge that idea, right? If you don't know, if you haven't already distilled down your value proposition to know exactly what your swim lane is as a product or a brand or as a company, how do you evaluate any idea that comes your way? It makes that any idea is just a good idea, but it's not a good idea if it's not something that your brand can leverage to drive growth in the category situation that it's in with the consumer insights that are available, or in this instance now consumer and agentic insights maybe that are available to that group. So I think I always say strategy allows you what to say no to as much as what to say yes to. Good strategy does that. And people often skip that stage, and that makes everything more complex down the road because once you have that filter, it's very easy to say, I'm focused on these things for my business, in marketing, or whatever decision I'm making because I know it's strategically correct. It doesn't mean strategy doesn't evolve over time. Of course it does. But at the starting point, when you're working with new brands and young brands, I think it's really important that everyone agree to hold the line on that and make decisions around a really common strategy.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. I had never thought of it that way. Very, very interesting. So,
Yeah.
across your career, you've worked in rooms with very different people, executives, creatives,
Yeah.
technologists, often during moments of change. So,
Yeah.
from your experience, what actually gets people to move when change is needed?
Yeah, actually think if you look at the last 2 years, success or failure has been on the human side of the equation, not the technology side of the equation in a lot of instances. Not that the technology is perfect or anything, but that we're dealing with a lot of complexity when it comes to working with people. Obviously, people have different skill sets, they have different fear relationships, particularly now with technology. And I don't know. I think it's really complicated to figure out. I also think I would say, we're trained in our careers to get more and more expert at something, right? Like we get promoted because we're great at it, because we have expertise. When you have a new technology come, it's really a time to put some of that expertise aside and say, I'm willing to unlearn some ways of working, or I'm willing to unlearn a process and that sort of thing. And for some people, that's a very uncomfortable place to be. They don't want to be a beginner. I remember talking about this when social media was really becoming a major factor in marketing, right? People had their old channels that they were really comfortable and confident in. And a lot of seasoned marketers at that time were like, I don't understand it. I don't understand how to win on these platforms. And therefore, I'm not putting them on my media plan, right? Like I'm literally like, just going to say I'm sticking with the things that I know. And of course, in hindsight, you go, that's a very big mistake, because right now, look at the bulk of so much spend on Google and Meta and a lot of these platforms. But I think people are often afraid to participate in something where they're a beginner, because they feel like it doesn't look well on them or set themselves up to be the expert in the room. And I think it's okay right now to say, I don't know, but I really want to learn and I really want to try. And I hope in leadership, as the leaders on the front line are giving space and room for people to say that and do that. You know, if you can set up an organization in a way where experimentation isn't just allowed, but you're incentivized to do it, like we normally incentivize around expertise, right? Like we promote people because they've reached milestones of knowledge or behaviors. If we could think about incentivizing the opposite, like the people who are willing to try new things, experiment, admit their mistakes, like rather than doing an evaluation of someone where you talk about all their accomplishments, instead you talked about all the things they tried, whether they failed or not. Like this would be the right thing to be doing right now, to set up a culture for all the people working in an organization to be more experimental, to be more vulnerable, to admit what they don't know, and to be willing to try new things, because you can't really close the door on where we are right now and just pretend it's not happening. And it's also dangerous to act like you're an expert when you're not. Because if people are sitting in rooms and saying, I fully understand how agentic AI is going to roll out in my organization, I just don't believe it right now. I just don't think there's anyone who
Yeah.
can be fully an expert right now. And that's okay. But we have to sort of, I don't know, give permission for people to stop posturing as experts in many ways. I'm sure people will listen to this and disagree with me, but I feel like it's a important time to really help lead teams into experimentation.
Absolutely. And like you said, I mean, change is scary. So
Yeah.
I always thought like what actually gets people to move when change is needed. Like I asked you, is it like logic? Is it emotion?
Yeah.
Is it fear? Is it something else? But that's so
Fear of being left behind. I think right now,
yeah,
I would say, if I look at all the meetings I've had with leaders, like these are people like often in C-suite roles in very large companies, leading large functional areas. And I think they are probably equally motivated by wanting to really do the right thing for the business and, you know, understand where things are going and help lead and help the company succeed. And then the other piece is not wanting to make sure that as a person working in that field, that you are not going to be left behind at this time. I think fear is definitely a big part of how people are operating right now. And I think we make better decisions when we operate out of hope versus fear, if we can, But I would also say with a new technology, a little fear is a good thing, because it's also the thing that gets people focused on really thinking deeply about the human cost of the technology, the value set, the safety guardrails, all of that really need to be considered.
Very interesting. Yeah. I definitely feel like we need to flow with structure, go with the flow with
Yeah,
structure. Definitely.
absolutely. Yeah.
So a lot of the conversation around AI focuses on speed and optimization and efficiency.
Yeah.
So when it comes to marketing or leadership, what's a form of human work you think we risk losing if we're not careful with AI?
What are we going to lose if we're not careful? Well, I mean, I'm not interested in AI as a job replacement for what people do. I think creativity, judgment, these are things that are massively important in marketing. And I think if everyone's generating millions of ideas using AI, ultimately all those ideas are coming from the same LLM. They're going to look the same. So I think leaning into your humanity right now is really the thing that we could all be doing, and doing as best as we can. As things get more agentic, we need to get more and more human about the way we do things, leaning to things that make us unique, not the things that AI can do. Like, I'm happy to have AI assist on things that have been historically too complex for me to do. I know from all my life's work, there are things that we've just struggled to nail as humans because they're really complex. And I'm happy for some help there, because I think actually AI tends to thrive in some of those areas of real complexity. But I don't want AI to be doing the job that I think is uniquely human. And I'm hoping that others feel the same way, and that we are applying it to the things that we couldn't solve for versus applying it to the things that we know humans can do well, because that's where job elimination and effects on the most vulnerable parts of our population become.
Yeah, it's very important to have that differentiation.
Yeah,
You're saying.
yeah.
Absolutely. So after being a CEO and advisor, you've been very intentional about being hands-on again in your work. So what do you learn by actually doing the work that you wouldn't learn just advising from the outside?
Everything. I honestly feel like the most relevant thing about me right now is that I'm doing the work. And by doing the work, I mean I am physically doing the work. When you're leading marketing for a startup, you're not necessarily leading a large team of people. You're coming up with the ideas, you're executing the ideas. In the instance of Elemind, myself and our CEO are starring in all of the ideas in our Sleep with our CEO campaign that's been doing really, really well for the brand. But I'm also I'm vibe coding things. I am, creating a lot of executional level thinking and ideas that are things that I haven't done before. And not haven't done them because I didn't have the chance to do them. Haven't done them because they're ideas that are for the moment we're in right now. Ideas that are working today that I don't think would have been the focus of my energies, 5 years ago. And I don't think I would be as relevant in my marketing expertise today if I was not doing that work. Really hands dirty kind of work. So I'm thrilled to have the chance to do it, and to, as I said, have that duality in my life where I'm doing that work and then I'm also talking to others who are doing that work and helping advise them. And it's been really interesting to play both those roles. I'm feel really, really grateful actually for the chance that I have on Elemind. And we're a young company, so we're pretty much a year into shipping on demand, and we have thousands of customers and over $3 million in revenue in that year, which is awesome. But some really hard months and some really successful months, and some things that really worked and some things that did not work at all. And I think the learning comes from both those directions, in very painful ways and in very happy ways, where you're going.
That's so interesting. That duality that you have. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, I want to ask you a little more personal question. So a lot of people in our audience are early in their careers, just graduating, just starting out and trying to find their footing in a moment that feels very, like we said, uncertain and fast moving. So if you could go back and have a conversation with your 22 or 23-year-old self just out of college, what would you want her to know?
It's so funny. I was just telling a story this past week about my first day on the job as a 22-year-old at Gray Advertising, my literally first day in their management training program. And that I learned one of the most valuable lessons of my career on day one, which was about how small the industry is. As I was introduced to my new client at Procter and Gamble, who happened to be someone that I had interviewed with at Procter and Gamble and declined to move forward in the process with. Like I had decided to
No way.
take myself out of the process, and then this person was my first client. So I think I learned moment one that it's a small world. But I would say in general, and I think we talked about this a little bit, you don't know exactly what part of work is going to be the right part of work for you. The best thing you can do for yourself in the early years is diversify your experience. And I don't mean by jumping from job to job to job to job. I think a lot of people do that, and that's fine if that's your way to gather learning. But often you can gather that kind of learning within a company by being really curious, by seeking out lots of different experiences so that you can find the thing that feels aligned to the work you want to do, the who you want to be, whatever that might be. And I would say also don't ever settle for stagnation. Like if you are not growing or you don't have someone committed to your growth, it could be one or the other. Like, I always say to someone, like, if you're in a job where your direct manager actually is very committed to your growth, you should stay in that job and get as much of it as you can. I mean, don't stay if it's horrible for other reasons, but saying like, rather than thinking I should go take that other job because I could make X more money or whatever it is, if you are working for someone who wants you to grow, is committed to your growth, and has demonstrated that to you, that's a very valuable thing in your corner in the first 5 years of your career. When you get past that initial period, people are hiring you because you already have something to bring. So it's a very different stage of career. So those first few years are really, really important. And the company might even be less important than the person you're working for. So I think people might get hung up on the name of the company or whatever it is. Oh, hello. I got a thumbs up. Is that from you or just from the app? I don't know what that was from. I guess it was well thought of. There we go. I think I would make the decision on the person that I'd be working for. Like if you have 3 jobs on the table for your first job, that would be a nice position for everyone to be in. I know the job market is not great, right? But if you have a choice, and you should deeply figure out what is the mindset of the person you're going to be working for. So even when you're interviewing, make sure that you're not just meeting with the person you're going to be working for. You asked to meet with the people who also report to that person, so you can ask them really honestly, what's that person like to work for? Or do they champion your needs? Are they interested in your learning? What's the evidence of that? Figure that out, because that's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference in your trajectory.
Absolutely. That's so lovely.
Yeah.
I love that. And I honestly, I did it for a little selfish reasons because I'm in that early stage of my career.
Okay.
And I really wanted to see what would you say to that version of yourself that was just starting out?
Yeah. My most memorable experiences at every stage of my career are probably tied to the person that I was working most closely with, more than the company I was working for. Right? Are you surrounded by people who are interesting, who want you to learn, who want you to grow, who challenge, and as you get more senior, who challenge your ideas, who call BS on things, and make your ideas better? Like that's really what you want. I think it's always about the people more than it is about the company in many ways. If you step back and look at the experience of work, it's not like you might have a favorite company that you work for, but you're always going to remember the people that you worked with or you worked for, or the leaders that you had a chance to observe, or whatever that might be. And then I would also say for those in your age group who have grown up in remote work, yeah, I would put yourself into as many in-person opportunities as you can, because there's a lot of passive learning that comes from watching people live in situation deal with tough circumstances, and it's very hard in remote work to get that same type of exposure. So if you're working for a company that has an office and says it's optional to come in, I would say come in and do that work. You don't have to do it every day, but like that's where you're going to really develop the relationships and develop the learning in many ways.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. Thank you for your insights, for your perspective, for sharing a little bit of your story, your advice. It's been great having this conversation with someone as talented as you and who has been part of so many changes. And just your perspective on everything that we talked about today is just so refreshing. And I'm very glad and I feel very fortunate that I could have this conversation with
Oh, thank you. You've been wonderful to talk to, and really appreciate the opportunity.
you. I love it. I'm going to stop recording.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend, and of course, subscribe.